I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be back.
In this new era, we're taking a new approach.
It will be uncensorable and uncancelable.
We can't give in to those who say we can't do better.
That is a disgrace.
We can make the West great again.
The status quo is not an option.
Welcome to the Liz Truss Show Extra. The Conservatives were in government for 14 years, and yet many of the country's problems, whether it was mass migration, a declining economy, or the advent of wokery, were not really properly dealt with. Partly that was down to Conservatives in name only who wanted to be the heir to Blair. But it was also because Blair had successfully rigged the system, installing his placement into major offices, creating a pipeline of new Blairites, changing the law so there was a web of legislation that prevented real change from taking place. The question is now, given that the Labour government is flailing and failing, Keir Starmer is currently 12% popularity ratings, are the new government, when they come in, whether that's Reform or the Conservatives in 2029, actually going to be prepared to take on the blob, to take down the Blair legislation, to remove the placement from office and actually change the culture of our institutions? That's what I'm discussing today with Mark Littlewood. He's the director of PopCon and the former head of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and was watching all the way through the Conservative government about what actually happened. It's great to be joined today by Mark Littlewood, the director of PopCon, to talk about Tony Blair's influence on Britain, but also how possible will it be to reverse the changes that Blair made to the Constitution. Mark, when did you realise that the people that you thought were in charge of the country weren't really in charge of the country and actually it was Tony Blair?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Liz. And I don't think that I had a kind of flash of inspiration or a road to Damascus experience. I did keep asking myself, when I was director of the Institute of Economic Affairs, which almost exactly my time there coincided with the 14 years of the Tories being in office, almost to the month. And I kept sort of scratching my head and thinking, we've got a Conservative government in office. I speak to a lot of Conservative MPs. We give them all of our arguments about liberalising markets, deregulating, getting the tax burden down, getting public spending down. The reception is always warm. Oh yes, I agree with you, Mark. I mean, you might be going a bit far, but very much like the direction of travel. And nothing ever happened. All right, the IEA was a think tank with a turnover of £2 million a year. I didn't expect every single thing that we put on the table to immediately become government policy. But I was reflecting on, I think we're intellectually winning the argument. We have, on the face of it, a government in office that should be sympathetic to us. It wasn't as we had Corbyn as Prime Minister or something. All of these people are telling me that they very much like these ideas and they're coming round to discuss them, and nothing's happening. Why is that? And I put that down to perhaps the Prime Minister at the time is just too weak or too consensual. But then I suppose it was actually sort of what happened to you that really brought it home. Okay, now we can go gangbusters, right? I'm pretty damn sure Liz is going to do a lot of this. I might not like everything she does, but I'm going to like 90% of it at least. And when that unravelled, I think, I reached the conclusion that we have a Potemkin parliament, basically. It is largely ceremonial, and there have been endless instances of that since you departed number 10.
And I think it's interesting that even some of the Labour people are now saying, we don't actually control monetary policy, we don't control fiscal policy, we don't control immigration policy. What exactly do we do?
I think that's exactly right. And but I have little sympathy for that because this is the world they wished for, right? I mean, the I don't quite know where Rachel Reeves got to in giving the OBR even more powers. I suspect that might now fall on fallow ground. But so they might be infuriated by it, but they are basically, by and large, at the top of the Labour Party technocrats, right? They sort of think that the world can be run through a social democratic spreadsheet. And what you just need to make sure you've got in place is enough bureaucrats who type in the right numbers in the right fields and the right boxes. So no doubt it is agonising for them. There's obviously been some sort of occasional big embarrassments rather than frustrations. I mean, the one that sticks out to me was Shabana Mahmood and the Sentencing Guidance Council. Now, I can't say this for sure because I don't know Mahmood, but when Jenrick pops up in the House of Commons and says, what's the Justice Secretary going to do about this? Everything on her face screamed that she didn't even know this had happened, let alone that she hadn't sort of signed it off or whatever. What's this guy talking about? So unbelievable that you could have a change in sentencing regime, an appalling change in my view, but nevertheless a dramatic change, with the Justice Secretary being even unaware, apparently, on the face of it, that this was happening. And then she uses all the powers at her disposal, which is to write a stiff letter. That was basically the only thing and eventually they unwind it. So there's endless cases of this. And I think the idea that we need to return to democratic parliamentary sovereignty, and however much we tend to dislike politicians of all stripes, but the idea that we need to return to actually empowering politicians and getting rid of them if we don't like their decisions, I think it's an idea whose time has pretty much come.
Do you really think that? I mean, I think we're seeing that on the edges.
Well,
we're talking about the Sentencing Council. We're seeing it a bit on the pressure on this West Midlands Chief Constable at the moment. We're seeing that politicians aren't making the decisions. And Nigel Farage has called for the abolition of the OBR.
Was he gone that far? I thought he was going to seriously consider it.
He's going to seriously consider it. But what we haven't seen is, we certainly haven't seen people arguing for the Bank of England to be made accountable again.
Yep. We
haven't really seen people say the civil service should be made accountable. So
yep.
I think we're at a foothills, Mark.
Well, maybe. I mean, you're being characteristically impatient, if I may say so. Let's,
I've only got a certain number of years on this planet, Mark. If you and I already said to our life.
No. Yeah, one life to lead, no time to lose. Yeah, I agree with that. You're right that, so is it an idea whose time has come or whose time is coming? I would agree with you that neither the Conservative Party nor the Reform Party have fully and comprehensively embraced this analysis to the extent that they have some kind of playbook of exactly what they're going to do in their first 100, 200 days in office, right? They haven't completely worked out whether, how or why to change the Northcote Trevelyan settlement, exactly which Quangos would be abolished or privatised or brought fully under ministerial control. That roadmap has not been comprehensively written, that's true. But the appetite for these ideas is definitely there in both parties on the centre-right. If you look at the pronouncements of Danny Kruger, for example, who is head of preparing for government, you'd think all of them would be preparing for government, but he's the head of it apparently. He talks in these terms all the time. Has he got the exact blueprint? Has he worked out the exact sequencing? No, he hasn't. Has he worked out exactly what the relationship should be with the Bank of England or even turned his attention to it? No, he hasn't. But his thought process is unambiguously along these lines, to the extent that I don't think Kruger, and even Reform in general, earlier this week I was at a big Reform meeting in Bournemouth, I think they're beginning to get the fact that sort of institutional change isn't just a sort of nice extra that we'll do if we've got a bit of legislative time to tidy up around the edges, a bit like, I don't know, bringing back fox hunting or something. It's not a nice to have. I think it's dawned on a lot of people that it is fundamental to getting Britain working again. It's not a ball, it's not an added extra. And in the Conservative Party, I think that's pretty firmly the view of Robert Jenrick. Now, he's not the leader of the party. Kerry Badenoch, I think, still talks in terms of sort of retail offers. You know, we're going to cut the civil service a bit here and save some money so we can cut stamp duty a bit there. It's still a little managerial, but they've moved on ECHR, they've moved on carbon net zero, baby steps, baby steps. So I think there is now the beginning of this idea being distilled into something that could well be a programme for government. don't want to rest on my laurels. Much done, but an awful lot amount to do. But there's appetite for it. I guess that's what I'd say.
I think people are beginning to identify it's a problem. I wouldn't say the public, apart from understanding Britain is broken and we've got a fundamental problem. The police are clearly not what they were. We've got these problems with Islamism. We've got these problems with the economy that are long-standing. I'm not sure they have turned their attentions to the permanent bureaucracy. We talk, Trump is clearly going for Jerome Powell in the United States of America. I don't think we see the same focus on the key linchpins of the system that we do in America.
That's fair. And I mean, that's because, if you like, the reformers, I use that with a lowercase r, aren't in government. But you'd get the Trump falling out with the Fed stuff if we had, hypothetically, a Farage government and he fell out with Andrew Bailey, whether, if he was willing to take on those battles in the same way that Trump was. And I think you're also right amongst the public, and I really welcome your thoughts on this, that there is this general view that Britain is broken. Not just that things aren't going great, that there's systemic failure, right? This is why I think reform is on the rise so much. The public aren't just like, oh, God, well, the guys in the red rosettes are as bad as the guy in the blue rosettes. Let's put the blues back in. There's a sense that there's something deep and fundamental that's going wrong. Now, there's no door I've ever knocked on campaigning in which I've said, what are the key issues for you? And they've said the Norfolk Trevelyan settlement around the civil service. What are you going to do about that? Or I'm a bit worried about the OBR's economic modelling, or whatever else it might be. But there is a general sense that nothing works, nothing's happening like it should. The system is rigged and unfair, not just incompetent, it's rigged. That, I think, is a widespread feeling amongst the electorate. What I don't know is whether it's important for the electorate to have a more informed and educated view than that, or if it's okay for them, if they just think, look, we've just got to take on the system and reboot it. Is that sufficient? Or do you need a more informed electorate than that? You certainly need a much more informed, politically active class than that to fundamentally get it and to drill down into how we might change the civil service. But I think the electorate in attitude is 2 or 3 steps ahead of the political class.
Well, you say that. I think it is important that people are informed, engaged, and prepared to do something, because we need new people working in government. Frankly, the current generation of bureaucrats are all creatures of the system. You are not going to change what happens in the British state if the majority of people in the civil service are still the same people. That is
that's interesting. You don't think incentive structures could change?
That's a recipe for failure. I think incentive structures are important in any organisation, but I think, first of all, the civil service is just far too big. And it's 4 million people, 1.5 million are in the NHS. It's set up in a peculiarly hierarchical and bureaucratic way, a sort of 19th century way, but with modern technology, endless email chains, endless HRification. I think you could genuinely run it on 10% of the people. I really do. Seeing the productivity levels in each of the departments I worked in. Plus, it's set up in a lot of different fiefdoms, which don't lend themselves to the expectation that the Prime Minister is effectively a president and needs to get on and do things. It doesn't work. I think you need something that is completely different from what we've got at the moment. And I don't think incentive structures around a failed system would work.
That's interesting. So what would be your recipe there then? I mean, do you... I was talking about this to another former Conservative MP the other day. He sort of put to me, Mark, are you really suggesting we just sort of start switching things off and see if anyone dies? Is that actually the recipe? Or do you have in mind that you have got a blueprint in which, I don't know, we merge everything into only 6 government departments, there's only 8 people in the cabinet, you've worked out what those cabinet roles should be. Do you have that blueprint? Because it's not obvious to me that how you could immediately replace the Whitehall staff, right? I mean, maybe you just get rid of the 90% of them, go and you presume that there's 10% who are up for the project, and that's enough to run it, is it?
You've got a clear issue, and lots of people agree on this, that there is not a strong centre of government at the moment. under the Prime Minister. Now, I like the White House system where you have the Office of Management and Budget, which essentially runs the budgets, runs the spending for the government overall. You have the central legal figures also are in the White House. That's what we have to do in Britain. So I think there's a corporate centre. If you're organising like this, like a corporation, you have a corporate centre, and then you'd have divisions that actually do the running the Home Office or running the police or running the immigration service. Yep. There are lots of bits of government that if you cancelled them today, like the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, I don't believe anybody would be seriously upset, let alone their lives at threat. So I think there are all kinds of bits of government that can quite simply go. Yes, there are critical parts of it. And I think what the Doge experience showed is that the payment systems are critical.
Okay, tell me about that.
What Musk did, what the Doge people did on day one, is understood where the money is going. And if we're looking in America at the issue in Minnesota, the huge welfare fraud, the involvement in the Somalia community, etc., it is by following the money. I think that's the most important thing. And one of the ways Whitehall exerts control at the moment is all the people that control budgets are the permanent bureaucracy. It's the cabinet secretary, the permanent secretaries. They're the people that are signing off budgets. They are known as accounting officers.
Right.
It's not the secretaries of state, it's not the minister. So the council of the budget is the most important thing. Because as Musk recognised, when you control the flow of funds, you control what the government does. And at the moment, the politicians don't control the flow of funds.
That's interesting. So, and don't or won't. I mean, when you were, say, Secretary of State of DEFRA, if you'd said to the permanent secretary, I want to see a full account of where the money's going, and I've got a large number of worries that I wish you to allay my fears about, what would they have said? None of your business, Secretary of State.
No, they would have said, of course, sir, Secretary of State, we'll go away and prepare those for you. 3 weeks later, you'd get, a very complicated document that may or may not tell you some of that. And then you say, well, I need an extra level down, you've got to do it. So it's like, unfortunately, our accounting system's got to deliver it that format, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a meeting with the relevant official. I can go through. And you'll be deluged and sunk through this. And bear in mind that in all these jobs, you've got the worst floods taking place since the 1950s. I had a crisis of avian flu where 5,000 ducks had to be gassed. And, the system itself deluges ministers. So you're, as opposed to operating in the corporate where you're directing what happens, is very much you're on the receiving end. And of course you try and direct what happens. And that's what I sought to do when I was at different departments. And, you have to push things through and challenge this. But I'm saying the sort of standard mode of operation is
got it.
You are there as a rubber stamper of all the things that they are suggesting.
And their modus operandi is consent and then evade, basically.
Yes. And each of those people, this is not all evil people trying to thwart the will of the minister. These are people operating on an incentive, which is they don't want anything to go wrong in their watch. Because they want to get promoted. And the way you get promoted in the civil service is you don't have any bad things on your name. It's a bit like a driving test. You don't pass a driving test by driving really well. You pass a driving test by not
hitting a pedestrian.
Or hitting a pedestrian, exactly.
I did have a friend who failed his driving test for hitting a pedestrian, actually.
Wasn't David Starkey?
It wasn't David Starkey. No. But so that is intriguing. But what's the remedy then? So let's imagine a new administration coming into office in 2029. They completely buy into the Truss analysis here and say, yeah, my God, you're damn right that is a problem. What change needs to happen in order to be able to follow the money and give Secretary of State's control? What is it, a piece of law? Is it a civil service protocol? Is it what is it that needs to change?
Well, the law needs to change, and the entire Blair legacy needs to be completely ripped up. And of course, there was the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010 that put the Civil Service Code into law. So all of that needs to be ripped up. There are other laws as well, and you talked about Northcote Trevelyan, which is in the 19th century, but all of that needs to be changed. And essentially, I think it needs to be run like a corporation. Mm-hmm. I think you should see the Prime Minister as a chief executive figure, the cabinet as the people who are part of the board.
Or departmental heads, so you get in a corporation, wouldn't you?
But you always have a strong corporate centre in a corporation. So the key issues like the finances, the HR, the legal stuff is all under the purview of the chief executive. And that's more similar to how the US administration runs. Yep. And I think that is the kind of system we need in Britain.
And you stop this ludicrous behaviour of trying to run the government out of number 10 Downing Street, presumably. I mean, it's ridiculous. You walk into that place, it's like visiting a National Trust building. You expect to be taken to the gift shop on the way out to buy a postcard or something. I mean, it's absolutely...
What way of dealing with the lack of funds like that?
So, right, and how quickly do you think that could happen? I mean, we've got potentially 3 years to work up all of these ideas, to draft the legislation. So you bring forward, I mean, there's a whole range of...
It can happen very quickly if there is political buy-in, but also if there is a wider national buy-in. What needs to happen? So I do not think we're at the stage of parties really being willing to do this, because they still don't understand quite how bad it is. It's only a few people, and I got to the top. So I saw it from not just the undergrowth in Whitehall, but I saw it from the top of the organisation, just how broken that system is. So I think once people understand how broken it is, then people are prepared to do something that's more radical.
That's interesting.
I don't think that is widely understood yet. I think...
You don't think we've understood that?
What we're hearing at the moment is we're hearing things from various people in Reform and the Conservatives, even the Labour Party, like, let's get rid of the OBR, let's get rid of the Supreme Court, let's get rid of the Migration Advisory Committee. You know, we're hearing this kind of idea. Or let's have another bonfire. Well, it hasn't actually been a bonfire with Quangos, but, you know, let's have these things. I don't think that people are at the stage of saying the British system of government, as it's been constituted really since the early 20th century, no longer works for our country. Mm-hmm. I don't think people are at that stage.
Right, that's interesting. And I would agree with that. I didn't want to sound ludicrously optimistic. I suppose my point is, I think there's a strong appetite for that sort of analysis, right? So, it doesn't strike me, I mean, maybe your experiences have been different, that if you were to put that theory, that take, and your suggestion of the necessary remedies to Nigel Farage or Zia Youssef or Richard Tice or Danny Kruger or Robert Jenrick or possibly Kemi Badenoch, I don't think they'd say, you're nuts, we don't need to do any of that. What are you talking about? We've got the best civil service in the world. They'd say, so but they haven't got to that crystal clear understanding yet, but you're suggesting there's even hostility towards that understanding.
What I'm saying, and you can see this in the press every day, is they're not at the Donald Trump, drain the swamp, we've got a problem with the deep state, we're going to actually take these people on.
Yeah.
They are not saying that. They're not saying...
Farage isn't saying that either.
We have a problem with the senior levels of the bureaucracy in Whitehall.
Right.
We've got a problem with the leadership of the Bank of England. I mean, the Bank of England has been an absolute failed institution since it was made unaccountable, yet you will rarely see it criticised in the press. You won't hear it criticised by politicians. There are endless articles justifying its independence.
Yeah.
And this term independence, I mean, how many people have you heard say there's a problem with the word independence? It means unaccountable.
Yes.
I didn't hear that from senior politicians.
No, that's true. I mean, it may be we're vociferously agreeing. I think there's a long way to go. I think there is now hostility to the Quangos, right? I mean, that now, again, the danger here is you get a whole song and dance about we're going to have a bonfire of the Quangos and a bonfire of red tape. And when it comes to it, you don't even get a gentle smouldering of either, let alone a bonfire. But that's definitely there, right? I mean, now maybe it's not being communicated as bombastically as Donald Trump would by either a Robert Jenrick or a Nigel Farage, but they're frequently saying, this is unbelievable, these unelected bureaucrats who are running the country. I mean, this is now quite a common theme. Just in our recent Popular Conservatives newsletter, we just put together a whole range of quotes from Badenoch, Jenrick, Chris Philp, Danny Kruger, Zia Youssef and Nigel Farage, which are all of these. Now, they're sound bites, you're right. Maybe the penny hasn't completely dropped. It's easy to say, Britain isn't working and we need a much more efficient government. But again, it points to me that there is an appetite.
When you say the word efficient, that's not what this is about.
Yeah, it's about
this
power.
Is deeply philosophical. Yeah. This is about, we have seen elected representatives usurped in favour of technocratic experts. Yeah. That was the whole Blair project, is that the lawyers, the medical experts, the economists, Keynesian economists, they're the people who we're going to put in charge of Britain. Yeah. These people stayed in charge through the entirety of 14 years. What I'm not hearing from the insurgents in the British political debate is that whole culture and ethos needs to be extinguished.
Okay. Well, I will send you my list of quotes. I mean, I agree they haven't gone on the full Truss journey here. But I think there is appetite for this, that unelected bureaucrats and quangos. I mean, it seems to me, let's put aside the civil service for a moment, because I think you and I would be on the same page that it's time to end Northcote Trevelyan, but park that for a second. Power has flowed out in two directions, hasn't it? Out of our left arm, we've lost a huge amount of power from Parliament to quangos, these expert committees. Sage basically ran the country, right?
They weren't very sage.
No, they weren't very sage, but or bat tunnels being erected over HS2 or whatever the hell else it might be. You've got all of these quangos, or the Sentencing Guidance Council. It goes on and on and on. Well, there's more than 400 of these things, right? And they are
most powerful is the Bank of England, which is the one that a lot of people don't talk about. Yeah. They'll list all the other ones, but they don't go for the jugular.
I suppose that's true, because there probably is a more interesting argument about the extent to which banks should be independent of politics, isn't there? I mean, I've changed my mind on that in light of the Bank of England experiment. Whereas I don't see any argument as to why the Sentencing Guidance Council should be independent of the Justice Secretary, right? That's just completely crazy. Whereas I can understand, at least in theory, that on some elements of economic activity, it is a technocratic function that you don't want manipulated by politicians. I can understand there's a case for that. It's not one I adopt, but there's a case for that. There is no such case for that with regard to bat tunnels over HS2.
I would say you could make exactly the same argument on both of them.
Okay, right.
Which is, you don't know about bats.
Yeah.
Mark. You just don't care about bats.
Both of those are true. I don't know. I don't care.
Studied bats and their habitats. Therefore, I should decide what is good for bats.
I think you should.
And this is the point. And it's the same with economics. What's happened is these economic technocrats have said, we know about what's good for the British economy and what's good for people. We're going to make decisions by printing vast amounts of money that are actually going to shaft young people because it's created an asset price spike. But we're not going to allow you to decide because you're a bit too stupid, Mr. Elector. You don't understand economics. You don't understand bats. You don't understand migration and why it's really good for you to have lots of people flooding into the country. It's exactly the same argument.
But there are presumably...
Just more people are scared of economics. They're scared of commenting about bats.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. But you would concede there are probably some areas where, in this horrible phrase, well overused now, operational independence. But there are some areas in which you want that, don't you? You don't want the Home Secretary to be able to phone up the head of the Net and say, I've got a list of 25 people I want you to go and arrest this evening, right? That is not how policing should work. So there needs to be a degree of operational independence in the hands of police officers there. Now, not to the extent that they can decide what the law is. Or
the individual cases. So I think that politicians should be able to set the rules, but individual cases should be pursued by the revenue or by the constabulary. And likewise, you need regulatory decisions that are like that as well. What I object to, though, is the word operational independence, particularly in the police, has been used as massive mission creep.
Yes, of course.
So, Mark Rowley says, well, I'm going to, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, I'm going to get these people arrested at Heathrow Airport because they've said X on Twitter, rather than pursue the burglary in Camberwell. That is not what the police should be deciding. That should be a decision that is politically driven.
Oh, well, that is interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's no doubt. I'm completely with you that the Met in particular is out of control.
By the way, even the individual decisions, I'm very worried about when those get put into law, because what happens is you get the front line, whether it's in HMRC or constables, pursuing, basically saying, you can't tell me what to do because I'm not I'm operation independent, I'm not accountable. They have to be accountable for those decisions.
Even on resourcing, you think then? So if you've got, I think the Met probably needs to be abolished and we need to completely change policing in London. But I would still expect my top plod to be making decisions about, well, there's been a rape and there's been an armed robbery and there's been some arson and there's been a murder. It looks like there's no chance we can solve the armed robbery. It looks like there's a fair chance with enough resources that we could solve the arson or whatever. They're going to make those sort of decisions about what resources to put into hotspots or particular cases to try and solve them, right? You're not going to spread all your resources equally.
I think that you should, because this is being paid for by the public, whichever elected person it is, they should be able to say, actually, the public don't really care about thefts on Oxford Street. What they actually care about is burglary.
Yeah, fair.
I want you, Mr. Chief Constable, to start tracking down the burglars. I don't want you focusing on this other issue. I don't want you arresting people
for having too many Brexity
books. There's legislation saying, even though legislation has been passed saying this. So yes, I think I'm very, very against public money being used for independent decisions. I think it's going to be incredibly careful and carefully sort of drawn around. And I think I would probably go further than you.
Isn't the way that would work? It might be we're spending a bit too much time just on the police force. Isn't the way that would work is the Home Secretary says, right, the overwhelming priority for policing in this government is to get the shoplifting rate down, for sake of argument. We really want that to be a big focus. By this time next year, I want shoplifting to have halved. And that missive goes out to every single chief constable. And they said, and how you go about this and, exactly how many people you put outside each branch of Tesco's or how quickly you respond to the alarm going off at Asda, that's up to you. But you are going to be measured at the end of this year on the concrete evidence that you have clamped down on shoplifting. And I'm less worried about littering, antisocial behaviour, burglary even, right? Shoplifting is what we're going for. And at the end of the year, the chief constables that haven't delivered get fired by the Home Secretary. That's the way it should work, isn't it? The Home Secretary is clear about the overall objectives. And if...
I would go further than that. So let's say you're a chief constable and I say, really, I want you to focus on burglary. And you hit the target. You hit the burglary target. I'm not actually happy with the way you've done it because I know you fitted up a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And so I think you should be able to be fired because I just don't think you've done a good job.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't think it's a metric thing. I think it's a hire and fire thing.
Yes,
so
I agree.
I've lost trust in you. I believe you've been fiddling the books, being lazy. It was actually your deputy who did all the work. That's the type of relationship I think elected officials should have with people who work for the state, and they don't have it at the moment.
No,
so that is fundamentally the problem.
That's fair. And, generally speaking, if you fire somebody from a job, it's a kind of mixture of KPIs and a sort of breakdown in trust, or I think you've hit the KPIs, but you just got lucky or whatever. Or sometimes you've missed your KPIs, but I can see there were a lot of mitigating circumstances. So I agree, that hire and fire relationship. And, how on earth is...
humanity has been taken out of this.
Yeah.
Because the relationship now with institutions like the OBR, it's a spreadsheet that comes over every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There's no actual discussion about what are our objectives for the economy, what impact all taxes are. It's all been reduced to technocratic numbers. It is a disaster.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. So we've got all these Quangos and this operational independence, which has gone way too far. I think you're right that the Bank of England just seems to get a free pass. It's outrageous. Of course, the other bit, I mean, I don't know, perhaps you would also call this a quango, but I would distinguish it, is the politicisation of the judiciary, right? I mean, if you want to affect immigration policy in Britain, don't become the immigration minister, become a judge. Because their interpretations of what Article 8 means and who can be kicked out of the country on that basis matters more than what the immigration minister says. This is ludicrous. I mean, I think the most terrifying example of this, I really will use the word terrifying, is that a few months ago when Kemi and Starmer were confronting each other over the dispatch box. And if I remember correctly, it was about whether rules for Ukrainian refugees had been properly applied to allowing a family from Palestine, even though the rules appeared to be just for Ukrainians. And Kemi and Starmer go back and forth on this, actually seem to broadly agree with each other. And then the Lady Chief Justice comes out and says, how very dare you discuss this over the dispatch box? Who the hell do you two think you are? I mean, she didn't seek to explain the decision or justify the decision. Her claim was that it was inappropriate for the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to debate this.
So Blair changed the law, so the Lord Chancellor no longer appointed the Lord Chief Justice.
Yes.
And when people feel they're completely immune from accountability, that's the way they behave.
Completely.
That is seen with the Lady Chief Justice. We've seen it with the Governor of the Bank of England, and it fundamentally doesn't work. Thank you so much, Mark.
Great pleasure.
For coming on the show. It's been great to talk to you about this. Very interesting discussion.
More power to you.
It's been great to talk to Mark Littlewood about the current situation in Britain. Does the public really understand how deep the rot is? Are the political parties prepared to take on the big institutions like the Bank of England that form so much of the blob in order to get change? Are they prepared to reverse the Blair laws that have tied this country up in human rights red tape? Well, the jury's still out, and part of the purpose of the Liz Truss show is to make sure that we have a group of people who are prepared to make that case and make that change. Please subscribe to the Liz Truss show on Apple or Spotify and carry on supporting the counter-revolution.